You guys might remember a while back I made a video called Fusion Confusion, which ended up being the most popular video on my channel, which I honestly didn't expect. It was just a video comparing Metamoran Fusion to Potara Fusion, and talking about Vegito versus Gogeta and who could potentially be more powerful. There are a few key things I left out of that video though. I only covered those two methods of fusion when there are a couple more. Whether it be in video games or in canon itself, there are other methods of fusion that can be used, so I decided why not make another video covering those methods that I didn't get to cover in that video. If you haven't seen it already, I'll link that video at the top of this video. I heavily recommend checking it out because it covers pretty much all the points about Metamoran Fusion and Potara Fusion, and we talk about things like Vegito versus Gogeta and other people like Gotenks and Kefla. I won't be talking about them in this video, but be sure to check out that one if you want to get some info about that. Here I'll be covering all the other fusion methods, as well as answering some questions that I got on that video. Like, of all the methods of fusion, which is the best? Or one that I saw a lot, is it possible for fusions to fuse? Pretty crazy, I know. Let's delve into it. First, let's start off with probably one of the most prolific ones that I left out, and that is Namekian Fusions. We actually got to see a decent amount of this in the main series. Back in Z we got to see two fusions, Piccolo merging with Nail and then Piccolo merging with Kami. And in Super, we got to see 3 more, the Universe 6 Namekians, Saunel and Perina, who merged with the entire planet in order to go into the Tournament of Power, and then in the Moro arc, we got to see one more, the so-called Namekian Savior, who is pretty similar to the Universe 6 Namekians, where he merged with a bunch of other Namekians on his planet to fight Moro. But as we know, that didn't go so well. We're mainly going to be focusing on Piccolo here because he's the one who we saw the full effects of the fusion from, and we got to see it twice. So Namekian Fusion is kinda weird. It's different from the Potara and Metamoran Fusion. Instead of temporarily turning 2 characters into one new character, this is a more permanent fusion, and it's more like absorption if anything. One dominant Namekian absorbs the others into them, and in this case that dominant Namekian is Piccolo, who absorbed Kami and Nail. A more appropriate name for it is assimilation, but sometimes it is referred to as fusion. That dominant Namekian keeps all of their qualities, while absorbing everything else from the other Namekian. Whichever Namekian is assimilating with the dominant one, they completely disappear, and everything about them lives on in the Namekian resulting from the fusion. Nail was the first time we saw this, and when Piccolo fused with him, he was actually powerful enough to hold his own against second form Frieza, which is pretty crazy once you consider how powerful he was in that arc. As for him merging with Kami, it was a different situation there. Piccolo and Kami, well, Demon King Piccolo and Kami, were actually merged before into one Namekian, so instead of this being a normal Namekian fusion, they were joining once again and becoming that nameless Namekian from before, hence why the fusion was so strong. The fusion was so effective that Piccolo was actually the strongest hero at this point in time. Everyone was fodderized by the androids before, but in terms of strength, post-fusion Piccolo was actually on par with Android 17, 17 being even stronger than his sister. While 17 did still have the advantage in terms of energy because he had infinite stamina and all that, it still goes to show how powerful Namekian Fusion is when you look at the fact that Piccolo was able to match him in terms of strength. Namekian Fusion appears to make the user multiple times stronger than they were before, and while it's not going to be as powerful as something like Metamoran or Potara Fusion, this is a permanent boost in power, and it's not a fusion that's just going to suddenly die out in the middle of battle. As for the Universe 6 Namekians, we didn't really get to see too much of them, but they also show this too. We don't know how strong they were before, but after fusing with all the people on Namek, they were strong enough to take on Piccolo and Ultimate Gohan and give them some trouble, and the regeneration was able to work quick enough where they barely took any damage. Piccolo wasn't even worried about using the special beam cannon against them, which would normally kill someone like that, and they actually seemed perfectly fine afterwards. Speaking of assimilation, since this really isn't a fusion, there are some others that I can cover, specifically absorptions. 2 of the characters that come to mind here are Cell and Boo. And while they aren't fusions in the normal sense of the word, the way they get their power boost is in a pretty similar way. On one hand you have Cell, who could basically drink other people and absorb them, stealing their energy forcefully. Or there's also the androids that he absorbs, and with the way he and the androids are built, once he absorbs them, he undergoes a transformation from it. But it's not really a true absorption because as we saw, Android 18 was still alive inside of him once Gohan punched him, so it's more like he was using them as batteries. As for Boo, his is more like fusion in the normal sense of the word, but more akin to what we saw with Piccolo. He could forcefully absorb someone into him, and by doing so, he transforms, gaining their strength and abilities, and even things like their mannerisms and their intelligence. He even gets to change of clothes when he absorbs someone, so his absorption is more akin to the normal fusion that we're used to. While it's not the same as Boo's, Baby from Dragon Ball GT has a similar technique, but it's more of a possession if anything. Kinda like Boo's power but in reverse. Instead of absorbing them, he gets them to absorb him, acting as a parasite and taking over someone's body. Similar to Baby, we see this in Dragon Ball Heroes with Kamen and Orin, who are Tuffles like Baby. They do use that same parasite technique and they absorb Kale and Caulifla, as well as Vegeta, but they do have their own form of actual fusion where they merge into one giant being, referred to as Kamen Orin, and it's a more traditional form of fusion where they join together. Pretty weird stuff. And while on the topic of GT, we also saw this with Super 17, where 17 and Hellfighter 17 fuse into one, but it's kinda more like an absorption than a true fusion. So while these absorptions aren't true fusions, it's worth mentioning them because they do work in a similar way. They power the user up and create a physical difference in whoever's being fused. And with those out of the way, we can now move on to the stuff that we saw in video game, which brings up some pretty interesting points. Possibly the biggest example of fusion that we saw in the video games was X-Fusion from Dragonball Fusions. This is kinda like an artificial method of fusion, and it works in a weird way. Two users wear a ring called the Metamoran rings, named after Metamoran Fusion, and while wearing those rings, they perform the fusion dance. Wearing these rings and performing the fusion dance creates X-Fusion. The difference between this and actual fusion is that the Metamo ring allows people to remain fused for however long they like, and it pretty much removes all the disadvantages of the fusion dance. The fusion dance would require two users of similar size and a similar power, but wearing the Metamo ring and performing X-Fusion actually disregards this. So you can have pretty much anyone, regardless of shape or size, fused into one person. Plus, the biggest advantage over regular fusion is that this can last indefinitely. It's not a permanent fusion, but it can be if the user wants. Instead of having a time limit like normal fusion, the users can remain in their fused form for however long they like, and then defuse whenever they desire. And these advantages are great, plus there's the fact that failed fusions are impossible, so you won't see fat or skinny fusions anytime soon when using this, which is also a huge upside. But even with all these upsides, there's still a downside. Of course, this fusion is powerful like any other fusion, but it's not as strong as regular Metamoran Fusion. We don't know how big the difference is between the two, but we do know that it is there. However, for all we know, it might be a small difference, and even with that, there's still all the other advantages it holds over regular Metamoran Fusion. Being able to be done without mistakes, and being able to last indefinitely are huge advantages. So instead of having a 30-minute fusion that's shortened by transformations and using power, it makes up for the difference in strength by having a fusion that lasts however long the users want it to, potentially creating a larger advantage in battle. Overall, this method of fusion is really effective, and it's really weird that we haven't really seen this in many other games. We do have some cards in Dokkan Battle with X-Fusions, but besides that, we only really have Dragonball Fusions to show it off. I mean, when you think about it, it would be kinda overpowered to just have this at your disposal whenever. Dragonball Fusions does have another form of fusion though, which is referred to as 5-way fusion or ultra fusion, and as you can tell by the name, it's pretty crazy. So alright, you got the regular Metamoran fusion dance, where you get two people fusing into one. That's pretty cool, so why not take that and do it with 5 people? Yeah, it's really weird, but at the same time really powerful. In the game, this technique was actually made by the Ginyu Force because, you know, they're 5 people, and having them all fuse into one could be pretty strong, but it is used again by some of the main characters. And just like regular fusions, this does have a time limit, although it's a lot shorter than what a normal fusion would have. I mean, you see what happens when a fusion uses too much power, so imagine 5 people fusing into one and using power like that. Not really going to be the most long-lasting form. Still though, maybe the massive amount of power that it has will be able to make up for that. There's also freeform fusion, which is done in a similar way to X-Fusion, but the results are different. It creates one user that has the traits of another, as opposed to making a new being that takes equal parts from both of its fusees. You can tell by their name alone. It has the dominant person's name, and then the person that fused inside of them. In a way, I guess it's similar to Namekian assimilation, except their appearance does change, while Namekian assimilation doesn't cause that to happen. There's not really too much here to go in depth about it, but it's worth mentioning this one because it's a pretty interesting form of fusion. Besides all the forms of fusion I mentioned here, there is one more from the 2008 Dragon Ball Z OVA, where Abo and Kato fuse into Avocado. This appears to be their own unique form of fusion where they merge into one being, and we're not really entirely sure how it works. Not that we need to know anyways. And I might as well bring this up too. At the time of recording this, we're waiting for a new chapter to the Dragon Ball Super manga, Chapter 57. I'm recording this right now on February 19th, and we do have some leaks about it, but the manga itself hasn't come out yet with the new chapter. But from the leaks, we saw that the 3 female aliens from Moro's crew, they're actually able to fuse into one being. By the time I'm editing this video, there will probably be a picture of it so I can throw it up on screen here. Again, we don't really know how this works and it's not really too important to bring up, but since it's a form of fusion, we might as well talk about it. So that all begs the question, which form of fusion seems to be the most effective? If we're bringing in video games into the equation, X-Fusion seems like it's the best type. It's a little bit weaker than a regular Metamoran Fusion, but since it lasts indefinitely and doesn't have any of the drawbacks, it's a really good technique to be able to use. 5-way fusion seems to be a lot stronger, but it doesn't last nearly as long. Namekian Fusion seems like it's permanent, which could be a good thing, but it could also be a bad thing, and the boost in power that you get isn't nearly as great as we saw from any other forms of fusion. And as for the other types of absorptions, assimilations, or fusions that we mentioned, they seem pretty strong, but not nearly as powerful as regular fusion would be, and they're only exclusive to certain characters. X-Fusion can be used by anyone of any shape, any size, any power, and it can be used to last however long the user wants. So really this seems like the best method. And I mentioned earlier in this video, could we fuse fusions and how strong would they be? Well, we've never been told that it's possible, but we've never been told it's impossible. In canon, if you think about it, this might actually work, but it would be kind of weird to do. I can see a few ways of this happening. 1, you have 2 Metamoran Fusions who then do the fusion dance once again. 2, you have 2 Metamoran Fusions that then use Potara. Or 3, you have 2 Potara Fusions that then do the fusion dance. We know that a Potara Fusion using Potara Fusion once again wouldn't work, but those other methods, it's never been told if that's impossible or if it's possible to do. If this were to happen, well, it would be really overpowered when you think about it, and it probably wouldn't last too long either. We saw how 5-way fusions work in Dragonball Fusions, it would probably be similar to that because you would have 4 people fusing into one. What's even worse is it's 2 fusions fusing into one, so that would probably shorten the time even more for that final fusion. In terms of strength though, I'd imagine that they'd be very powerful. When you think about it, it might be possible in Dragon Ball Heroes because you would see Xeno Goku and Xeno Vegeta turn to Xeno Vegeto, or Xeno Gogeta, and then you have regular Vegeta and Goku fuse into Gogeta or Vegeto, and then they can fuse into that fan-made character that everyone talks about, Gogetto, which would probably be freakishly overpowered. It's not just possible with them, but that's the only way I ever see this happening, and I doubt it ever will just because of how weird it sounds. But is it possible? I'd say maybe. 50-50 shot really. If we're talking about the video game logic, then wearing the Metamo rings would probably allow this to happen, but in terms of canon, I don't really know if this would be possible. It's not impossible, but it's hard to say whether it could actually occur or not. For all we know, we could see that in the future, which would either be really cool or really stupid. Anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. So now I want to hear from you guys. Besides Potara and Metamoran fusions, which fusion is actually your favorite? I'm a huge fan of Piccolo, so I'm gonna have to say Piccolo. But there's a bunch of other options to choose from, so I want you guys to comment below. It is a discussion video after all, and I want to see your guys' thoughts. It would be interesting to see the fan favorite. As always, if you liked the video, be sure to drop a like, and if you haven't already, why not subscribe, as well as hitting the bell icon to get notified about any future videos I make like this one, or any other videos that I upload to my channel. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.